What if the fall of a mighty empire wasn't decided on the battlefield, but in a royal bedchamber, by a king who could barely walk, who could barely speak, and who was so disfigured by generations of inbreeding that even his own wives trembled in fear? Welcome to the channel, my friends. Here, we drag the shadows of history back into the light. If this is your first time with us, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring that bell, because tonight, you're about to discover a story so disturbing, so grotesque, it reads like a Gothic nightmare. This is the story of Charles II of Spain, El Hechizado, the Bewitched King, the last Habsburg of Spain, a monarch whose twisted body carried the weight of 16 generations of incest, and whose tragic life dragged one of Europe's greatest empires to its knees. Stay with me, because once you step into this tale, you'll see how an entire dynasty, once the richest in the world, destroyed itself, not with swords, not with cannons, but with its own blood. From the moment Charles II inherited the throne in 1665, Spain faced a terrifying truth. Their king was a child barely able to stand, and even as he grew into manhood, he would never grow into strength. The empire still carried the memory of Charles V and Philip II, rulers whose armies dominated Europe. But Charles II, frail and trembling, was no warrior king. He was a figurehead, a puppet, a man constantly watched, whispered about, and feared for what he could not do. They called him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. And indeed, many believed he was cursed. When he stumbled in public, when he drooled in court, when his speech slurred into incoherence, it was easier to blame sorcery than the truth of centuries-long inbreeding. Priests were summoned to perform exorcisms. Holy relics were pressed against his skin. Candlelit processions prayed for his health. Yet nothing changed. His mother, Mariana of Austria, ruled as regent for much of his youth, and even after he reached adulthood, she continued to dominate him. Ministers fought for control. Foreign ambassadors schemed for influence. But Charles himself, Charles the King, remained a shadow in his own court. Still, he was a man, and kings were expected to marry. His first wife was Marie-Louise of Orleans, niece of Louis XIV of France. She was only 17 when she was sent to Madrid. Imagine her horror when she met her husband, a man with the infamous Habsburg jaw jutting so far he could barely chew, his body trembling, his health collapsing before her eyes. Marie-Louise wept on her wedding night. She wrote in letters of her loneliness, her despair, and her dread of being forced into a bed she feared. The people of Spain watched for an heir. Months passed, then years, but no child came. Whispers grew louder. The king was impotent, sterile, incapable of fathering the next generation. Marie-Louise, miserable and trapped, fell into depression. She died young, at just 26, officially from appendicitis, but rumored to have wasted away from sorrow. Charles remarried. His second wife, Mariana of Neuburg, arrived with promises of fertility. She was instructed, pressured, even begged to produce an heir. Yet again, no child came. Instead, her life became a mirror of her predecessors: loneliness, fear, and the unbearable presence of a broken king who could not fulfill the most basic duty of monarchy. By now, the rumors were unbearable. Pamphlets spread across Europe, mocking the Spanish king as a ghoul, a demon, a bewitched creature. The mightiest empire on earth was ruled by a man who could barely rule himself. And the empire, like the king's body, began to collapse. The Spain Charles inherited was already weakening. Wars had drained the treasury. Colonies groaned under misrule. Silver from the New World no longer poured in as before. But Charles's incapacity magnified every weakness. He could not lead armies. He could not sire heirs. He could barely sit a horse without collapsing. At court, power struggles raged. His mother's faction clashed with foreign ambassadors. France and Austria both circled like vultures, eager to claim Spain Once Charles died childless. Every decision was debated, manipulated, turned into a battlefield between European powers. And in the heart of Madrid, the king wasted away. Accounts describe him as ghostly pale, with long drooping hair and protruding chin, his tongue too large for his mouth. He was plagued by seizures, stomach pains, and constant weakness. At times, he could not swallow food, surviving on liquid diets. At others, he was so exhausted he could not walk across a room without collapsing into a chair. Yet he lived on, year after year, while Spain decayed around him. The people, desperate for answers, turned increasingly to superstition. They whispered that witches had cursed him at birth, that the devil had stolen his virility, that black magic clung to the palace walls. Exorcisms were performed. Monks and nuns were summoned to pray endlessly. One report tells of priests forcing Charles to drink holy water mixed with ground relics of saints, as if salvation could be swallowed down like medicine. But medicine could not cure him, nor could prayer. For beneath the rumors, the truth was simpler and more terrible. Charles was the product of incest, so extreme it had destroyed him before he was even born. And with his broken body, the Spanish crown itself began to fracture. By the end of the 17th century, Charles II of Spain was a man imprisoned in his own body. Physicians of his time could not name his illness, but modern historians believe he suffered from multiple genetic disorders. A deficiency of the pituitary gland, leaving him stunted, weak, impotent, sterile, and plagued with digestive failure. And renal tubular acidosis, which scarred his body with blood in the urine, fragile muscles, and a head grotesquely large compared to the rest of his frame. To his court, the symptoms were terrifying. He could not walk without stumbling. He could not chew food properly, drooling constantly. His speech was slurred, his body wasted. At 30, he looked twice his age. And yet, the Spanish court did not blame science. They blamed sorcery. Doctors failed, so priests were summoned. Exorcists chanted over the trembling king. He was forced to drink holy water mixed with powdered relics, as though the bones of saints could heal centuries of incest. Candlelit processions paraded through Madrid, praying for a miracle. Monks claimed demons clung to his soul. Some even whispered that Charles was not merely sick, but possessed. But no miracle came. His suffering was not the work of witches. It was the final harvest of Habsburg pride, of generations who chose blood purity over survival. The irony was cruel. In their obsession to keep their dynasty untainted, they produced a king incapable of creating an heir. Charles lingered until 1700. He was only 39, but his body had been dying for decades. When he finally collapsed, the autopsy horrified even his physicians. A heart the size of a walnut, blackened lungs, intestines rotted, his body swollen with fluid, his head grotesquely large, his body skeletal and wasted. The most corrupted corpse we had ever seen, one account recorded. And with him died the Spanish Habsburg line. The throne he left was empty. No children, no future. His death ignited the War of the Spanish Succession, a decade-long conflict that pulled Europe into chaos. Charles II, the Bewitched King, had become more than a man. He was a symbol of warning, written in blood and bone. The dynasty that sought eternal survival through incest ended not with triumph, but with silence.